In this video, I'm going to be installing a CPU socket and upgrading the CPU in this late 2009 Apple Mac Mini. Now, this is not my machine. I'm actually doing this mod for Greg Rutke of Rutke Mods, and his channel will be linked in the video description. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be removing the original soldered-in processor, which, as you can see here, is a 2.26 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo. And I'm going to be soldering in this BGA 478 CPU socket. And this is just going to, of course, sit on the place where the original CPU was. Of course, it is a BGA CPU. And this is a BGA socket, as you can see. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the CPU off the board, removing all the solder, and then soldering this CPU socket in its place. And in theory, it should work just fine. I have actually done this before on a MacBook logic board, and it did indeed work just fine. However, the one thing I'm not 100% sure about is whether or not the stock CPU heatsink will work with the added height of the socket. But considering that the older models of this exact form factor Mac Mini did indeed have a CPU socket exactly like this installed, I think it should work just fine. So yeah, here's the CPU I'm going to be using. As you can see here, this is a 3.06 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo T9900. And of course, that will be quite a big upgrade over the 2.26 GHz CPU that's currently installed. So I'm going to go ahead and get this machine taken apart, and then we'll begin the process of removing the original 2.26 GHz CPU. So I'll go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gotten the logic board on the board preheater here. Of course, I've got both the North Bridge and processor heatsink taken off. And the next thing we need to do is just remove this foam right here and these little adhesive things around the CPU. So the first thing I'm going to do is just try to get this foam off of here. The board's hot, so it should come off relatively easily. Yeah. Cool. Set it aside. Alright, so now that we got all the foam removed, now we can go ahead and remove these little things. Alrighty, so now that we got all those off, now we just need to increase the temperature of the board preheater, and then we can begin putting flux around the chip and taking it off the board. So just increase the temperature by about 30 degrees. So while that's warming up, I'm going to go ahead and apply some flux. And now that the flux is applied, now all we have to do is just let it heat up, and then we can begin the process of desoldering the original CPU. Alright, so I've gotten the board up to temperature now. I've also gone ahead and aligned the hot air nozzle over the chip. So now all we have to do is turn on the heater and begin desoldering the chip. Alright, so the chip is almost ready to come off the board. However, there are a couple components that we need to remove. as they're going to be in the way of the socket when we put it on. So there's one capacitor right back here. You can't really see it, but I'm going to have to remove that. And this little metal bracket here. And neither of them are melted yet, so I'll have to go back later and remove those before I solder the socket on. But the CPU is now ready to come off the board. So now I'm going to go ahead and get my tweezers here and pull it off. Turn on my soldering iron, and now we begin the process of removing all of the residual solder. Alrighty, so as you can see, I have removed all of the residual solder now. So the next thing we need to do is clean the surface using some rubbing alcohol. Alright, so as you can see now, I've gotten the flux all cleaned up off of the CPU socket area, or the CPU area I should say. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and desolder these components right here. So as you can see, there's one capacitor right here, and there's one little grounding tab right here. And both of these will need to come off in order for the CPU socket to sit on there. As if we go and take a look at the socket, you can see that this little back part of it here isn't going to clear them. So yeah, those are going to have to come off. But I can relocate the capacitor, and of course this thing is not necessary. So yeah, this should work out just fine. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is switch my hot air nozzle over to the smaller one, just so I can heat up the components and remove them. Alright, so my hot air is now up to temperature, so now I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more flux on that, as well as the capacitor. And now I'm going to go ahead and just heat them with my hot air and take them off the board. Alright, now that we got those removed, I'm going to go ahead and clean up a little bit more, and then we'll be ready to align the new socket and solder it onto the board. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply flux to all of the pads, and since this is a socket and they do like to soak up flux, I am going to apply quite a bit more than I do normally. Just because when the socket is heated, it will suck in the flux and it won't float away or anything, so you don't really have to worry about that. Alright, so now the pads are evenly coated with flux, and now the last thing we gotta do is take the socket and align it onto the board. Actually, before I do that, I am gonna take off just a little bit of flux. That's because there is quite a bit on there. Yeah, so that should be good, just like that. So now we'll take our socket, place it down onto the board, and now I have to align it properly onto the pads. So that will require a light and a pair of tweezers. Alright, so that socket seems to be aligned pretty much perfectly. So now I'm going to prepare my hot air, get my other nozzle back on there, align the hot air nozzle over the socket, and solder it onto the board. Alright, so I've gone ahead and gotten the nozzle aligned over top of the socket. The socket itself looks to be aligned perfectly onto the board. So now we're going to go ahead and turn on the hot air and solder it on. Now, I do have the board preheater a little bit higher than I normally set it to. I have it set to about 200 degrees Celsius right now. And I am setting the nozzle, or the hot air, a little bit lower than I normally do. And that's, of course, because the CPU socket is plastic, and we want to avoid having it melt. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start heating it up. Alright, so it appears to be soldered on there now. It looks to be flat, and all the solder balls look like they're molten at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and shut off the hot air, let it cool down, and then we'll be able to resume and finish this machine off. Alrighty, so as you can see here, I have installed the CPU socket. It's soldered on just fine. As you can see, it looks perfect. And if we take a look at the side of it here, you can kind of see that all the balls look to be flattened and like they should, and are connected to the pads. Of course, the socket doesn't move at all. I have already put this board through my ultrasonic cleaner, so I have removed all the flux off of it entirely. And I also have reinstalled the North Bridge heatsink here, so we can actually go ahead and test this machine. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and install the CPU. So of course, we are going to be just plopping the CPU into the ZIF socket, and then tightening it down. So, let me go ahead and get my screwdriver ready here. And then, we're going to go ahead and install the CPU. So of course, like any socketed CPU, you just kind of take it, line this corner up with the arrow pointing towards the arrow of the socket and the two missing pins, as you can see right there. Let's go ahead and throw that on. And then we'll go ahead and take our flathead screwdriver and tighten the ZIF socket down. Now, the next step, of course, is to install the CPU heatsink. Now, this heatsink, like I mentioned, should fit on just fine. Now, the only thing I'm concerned about with this is, for one thing, that the pins, these little plastic push pins, may not be long enough to reach that far down. However, if necessary, I should be able to just cut the spring or something, and that way it can go down a little bit more. But I don't think it'll be necessary. As you can see, it does have quite a bit of travel to it. That's it fully pressed down. And I think that should be able to just clear the height of the socket and CPU right there. So yeah, I think that should be okay. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is apply some thermal paste and attempt to install the CPU heatsink. If we do get the CPU heatsink installed, we'll go ahead and test the machine. Otherwise, I'll have to probably cut the springs of these little push pins here to get them to extend farther downward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get some thermal paste applied, attempt to install the heatsink, and then I'll go ahead and resume the video. Alright, and would you look at that? The CPU heatsink fit on just fine with no modifications needed whatsoever. So you can see that the push pins are indeed long enough to go all the way through the board. You can see they come out on the other side and are completely latched in just like they're supposed to be. You can see the socket, of course, is still there and the processor is installed. And everything seems to be lining up perfectly. The heatsink is not touching the side of the socket here and is only touching the CPU die, which is exactly how it should be. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug the system in, turn it on, and see if we actually get it to boot. I do also have a memory module installed as well, so we can actually turn it on. Let's go ahead and plug it in there. You can see the trickle power LED came on the logic board. So now let's go ahead and short out the power pins, turning the system on. There we go. See, the second LED is on, and let's see if we get video. Oh, we got a signal already. And look at that, we have video. So I'm going to go ahead and let it sit here for a little bit until the flashing question mark appears. So yeah, the machine is still running. The heatsink's starting to get a little bit warm, but it's not too bad so far. I think this will work just fine. So let's go ahead and wait here till it shows the flashing question mark. And if we get that, then that means everything is working. And look at that, we have the flashing question mark on the display, and the board is working perfectly fine. The heatsink's getting warm, not too warm, but just as warm as I would expect it to get. So yeah, now all I need to do is reassemble the system, turn it on, and we can finally get into the system and see how it runs. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble the entire machine, and then I'll go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, I've gotten the machine completely reassembled. You can see everything's put back together. Everything fits perfectly. You can see there's no gap up above the plastic and the metal here. And yeah, everything is completely flush and fitting exactly as it should. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and power on the machine and let it boot into a copy of macOS. And it chimes, and there we have the video signal, and it is now booting into OS X. So I'm going to go ahead and let this finish booting, and then I'm going to go ahead and resume the video. Alrighty, so as you can see here, OS X is now booted on the machine, so let's go ahead and take a look at About This Mac. Alright, and there it is, there's the machine. You can see it now has the 3.06 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo CPU that I installed. That is, of course, the Core 2 Duo T9900, which is the absolute best CPU you can install into one of these machines. Of course, the socket is installed, so the CPU can be swapped out and changed whenever you want without any soldering whatsoever. So that makes this the first late 2009 Apple Mac Mini to ever have a socketed CPU, because none of these machines from the factory came with a socketed processor. None of the 09 ones anyway. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at System Profiler and see what it has to show. Alright, so there it is, the Mac Mini 3,1, which is of course the 2009 model, 3.06 gigahertz, both cores are detected, all 6 megabytes of L2 cache, and of course the bus speed of 1.07 gigahertz. So there it is, the socketed CPU upgrade on this late 2009 Apple Mac Mini. Now, of course, if you want to take a look at more info and more detail about this machine, please check out Greg Rutke's Rutke Mods YouTube channel, where I am sure he will be showing this machine once I send it back to him. So I'm sure he'll have a lot of nice content about it and performance tests and whatnot. So go ahead and check out his channel. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and shut the system down, and that'll be it. I don't know what it's doing here. That was weird. I didn't realize it was auto-updating. But anyway, that is the late 2009 Apple Mac Mini socketed CPU upgrade. Hope you enjoyed this video.